Okay, so we constantly hear from Christian apologists that the Prophet Muhammad, that there's moral problems with the Prophet Muhammad. Christians and atheists always say that. Now, I want to draw attention to one person in the Bible named David. Of course, Jews and Christians know David because he's mentioned in the Bible. He's mentioned both in the Old and New Testaments. But anyways, according to the Bible, it would be hard to find anyone in the Bible that God liked more than David. David was directly selected by God to be king, and the spirit of the truth came upon David from that day forward. We read this in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 10 to 13, and the Lord said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is me." Then Samuel took the horn of oil and appointed him in the midst of his brethren, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So David was perfect with the Lord, and the Lord God of hosts was with him. We read this in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 10. David grew great, and the Lord of hosts was with him. Solomon's heart was not perfect with the Lord, his God, as was the heart of David, his father. In 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 4, and 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 3. So David walked in God's ways and kept his statutes. In 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 14, in 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 5, it says, because David did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. So basically, and then we read in the book of Acts in the New Testament, that David was a man after God's own heart. In Acts chapter 13, verse 22, also see 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 14. It says David was a man after God's heart. So let's see what David did that God approved of. So whatever David did, according to the Old Testament, God approved. So if Christians are pointing the finger at Muhammad because Prophet Muhammad did this and that, they have to be consistent and point the finger back at David, because whatever the Prophet Muhammad did, Prophet David did too, according to the Old Testament, according to the Bible. And we read in both the New Testaments and in the Old Testament that David was perfect with the Lord. The Lord God of hosts was with him, and David walked in God's ways and kept his statutes. And according to the New Testament and the Old Testament, David was a man after God's own heart. That means that David did whatever God commanded him to do, and God was pleased with David, or God loved David, because the Bible, or both the Old and New Testament, says he was a man after God's own heart. So David did whatever God told him to do. So let's read what some of the actions that David did, which were approved by the God of the Old Testament, or the God of the Bible. We read that David fought many wars. In 1 Samuel 17, David actually killed people. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 20. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 25 to 27. David fought with the Philistines and slew them with great slaughter. In 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 8. Let's see here. David had many wives, according to 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 5. What else? I'm trying to keep this list short, so I'm just trying to get to the big stuff David did. David sees a woman, Bathsheba, bathing, and likes what he sees, so he sends for her and commits adultery with her, for she was purified from her uncleanness. She conceives and bears a son, which God later kills to punish David. In 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 2 to 5. Let's see what else. David hacks and burns to death the inhabitants of several cities in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 31. God King David tries to get some heat by having a beautiful virgin minister onto him in 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 1 to 4. In David's last words, he commands his son Solomon to murder Joab in 1 Kings chapter 2 verse 5 to chapter 1 Kings chapter 2 verse 5 to 9. So so Christians always criticize the prophet. My point is Christians always criticize the prophet Muhammad, right? They say, well, he had many wives, he fought wars. Well, King David, again, a man who was after God's own heart. That means whatever David did, the God of the Bible approved of it and loved it, loved David's actions. David had many wives in 1 Samuel chapter 3, in 1 Samuel chapter 30 verse 5. David also fought wars. We read this in 1 Samuel chapter 19 verse 8. In 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 25 to 27. He kills 200 Philistines and brings their foreskins to Saul to buy his first wife. So David literally buys his first wife. So they regarded as women as property back then, or some kind of prized possession back then. So my point in making this video is that Christians are very inconsistent, because whatever the Prophet Muhammad did, Prophet David did in the Bible. And of course, David was perfect with the Lord, and the Lord of hosts was with him. And David walked in God's ways and kept his commandments. And David's heart was perfect with the Lord, and the Lord God host was with him, etc., etc. So we read these passages that, according to both the Old Testament and New Testament, David was a man who God loved and God liked. So whatever the actions of David were, including polygamy, war, etc., it was approved by God. So why is the Prophet Muhammad criticized for doing those things, marrying several wives and fighting wars, etc.? And David is praised in the Bible by the God of the Bible for doing the same exact things. We know David had many wives, he fought wars, etc., etc. So you see the hypocrisy, you see the inconsistency of Christian critics of Islam and atheist critics of Islam, since atheists also don't bring these facts up, when criticizing the Prophet Muhammad's morals or the Prophet Muhammad's behavior, etc., etc. Because whatever you find with the Prophet Muhammad, you find it in the Bible too. Whatever actions the Prophet Muhammad did, you can find those same actions from prophets in the Bible, prophets like David, etc. But I'm just focusing on David in this video. So you see the inconsistency, or you see the hypocrisy, with these Christian apologists. So that's my this is just my 2 cents on this whole, moral problems with the Prophet Muhammad. Well, there's moral problems with if you're going to go that route, if you're going to criticize the Prophet Muhammad for that, there's moral problems with prophets in the Bible as well. Stay tuned, more videos coming ahead.